Hey guys, we are going to finish up our unit on Europe with the talk of the Cold War. We're going to talk about the origins, what started it, and what were the consequences of the Cold War. Basically, guys, we're going to talk about this concept called the Iron Curtain. Well, if you think about it, iron is a really dense, tough metal, and a curtain is something you cover up or you try to hide things with. The term Iron Curtain is a big deal when we start talking about Europe during the time period after World War II. Okay. Basically, guys, at the end of World War II, of course, the Allies win. There are two separate Freedom Days. One is after the defeat in Europe, which is called Victory in Europe. And then the second is Victory in Japan, which happens just a few months after the victory in Europe. Well, ultimately, guys, there's some issues with the defeat of the Allied powers, or excuse me, the Axis powers in Europe after the end of World War II. At the end of World War II, the Soviet Union and the United States actually worked together to defeat Germany, to defeat the Axis powers. Well, at the end, everything was happy. All of the countries were excited, and the Allies started giving money to these nations that had been overrun by communist Germany, so they could build these democratic governments. And of course, democratic meaning it was a government by the people, basically. The people actually have say so in their governments at this point. Well, here's where the issue starts. Western Europe returns to normal. They take the money that's given by the Allies and they say, great, wonderful, we're going to take this and be thankful and be democratic. But the eastern side of Europe didn't have that opportunity. Basically, the Soviet Union came in and they didn't leave. Basically, what they started doing is setting up communist governments in a lot of the smaller Eastern European nations. Well, at this point, this starts making the United States and a lot of those Western European countries really upset because they're scared that communism is going to try to take over the world. There was a big thing, it was like the Red Scare, and everybody, especially even in the United States, if anybody was thought to have communistic ideas, they were arrested. And it was a really tense time period because communism is not a great idea for people. And so all of these democratic countries were really scared that somehow this communism was going to leak into these democratic countries. You start seeing the overtaking of places in China, the Soviet Union, of course, but some of those smaller European countries, Western European countries. And ultimately, finally in 1946, uh, Britain's Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, great man, he said that basically that there was going to be that at this point, an iron curtain of Soviet totalitarianism had fallen across Europe. So basically, what he's saying is now there is a dividing line between the democratic countries in Western Europe and the communistic countries in Eastern Europe. So basically, he's saying that at this point, this iron curtain is showing that there's a lot of tension between the communists and the democratic countries. Okay. Now, of course, the communistic countries do want to take over. They want as much land as they can possibly get, as much resources. But you got to remember the government's taking over. They make all the decisions. Their people don't have rights and civil liberties that people in democratic countries have. The government says what the country is going to make, what they're going to produce, how they're going to make money. And if you don't line up with that, you disappear or you just get arrested. So basically, guys, if you look at this map, this red right here is exactly where the Iron Curtain ran. And you can see that there's a lot of countries that are involved that are behind this communist area. Okay. So all of these countries right in here are really nervous about them advancing. Okay. Now, if you look up here in this box, this is actually Germany. Okay. Um, Germany itself, its capital city of Berlin, was actually split. You have West Berlin and East Berlin. Okay. This is a big deal because here you have democracy, here you have communism. And there's a lot of tension just in this area alone. Okay. So basically, guys, this right here is Winston Churchill says, from Stettin in the Balkans to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. Behind that line lies the ancient capitals of Central and Eastern Europe. Basically, he's like, here's your line. We've got to protect our democratic countries from this. Um, all right, so here you have, and if you look down at the bottom, you have these people who are actually trying to escape. Um, and that's where things start getting a little crazy. And of course, you have the Soviet Union up here saying, you can't fence me in, basically. Okay. So, what is this Eastern Bloc? Well, basically, in this eastern side of Europe, they set up governments. They set up these communist governments, and they outlawed political parties. They outlawed all newspapers or anything that tried to speak out against communism. The Soviets actually went through, guys, and they started killing or jailing a lot of their political opponents because they didn't want to have to, they weren't going to deal with it. They had taken over, and that was it. One of the biggest things you see is the fact that they were rigging elections to make sure that the communist governments succeeded. All right. It did not matter what these people wanted in the eastern section of things. Okay. So if you'll see, here it starts in the Soviet Union, it goes down into China, North Korea, spreads into Czechoslovakia, Hungary, all of these areas. That's a large portion of communism in the Western world. Okay, I mean, excuse me, in the Eastern world. If you look up here in this map, you see just how much of the world was taken over by communism. Okay. Now, when you keep looking, I mean, guys, these governments were coming in with tanks. It was a military takeover in a lot of areas. Okay. Basically, guys, what starts happening is there's a lot of mistrust or just not understanding between the Soviet Union and the United States. You have the Soviet Union that is a world power, and you have the United States that is a world power, simply because both countries have a lot of political strength. They have a lot of military power and are able to do a lot of influencing on countries around the world. So you have the Democratic United States and the Communist Soviet Union. So basically, they have a lot of opposing views. The Soviet Union believes that a powerful central government should control your economy and should control your government. All right, so a central power. The U.S. did not believe that. They believed that even businesses should be owned privately. Private citizens should be able to own these. And basically, guys, this disagreement between these two countries start this huge long period of tension that we actually call the Cold War. All right. The Cold War is a Cold War because there's not really any fighting that breaks out. It's still a war. It's a war basically on paper. It's a war basically when it comes to trading and how things work within the countries, but there's not really any fighting that takes place. Ultimately, guys, the Cold War lasts from 1947 until 1991. So I was alive. I was a little girl when the Cold War was finally over. Okay. But basically, both countries are worried that the other is going to become the most powerful and spread all of its political views and its economic views to other countries, and they don't want that. They want to be the most powerful. Um, and again, there was a point because at the end of World War II, if you'll remember, the war against Japan was ended by two nuclear or atomic bombs. Okay, they were dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Well, because this nuclear power had started to come about, both sides were actually really worried that the other was going to get into this nuclear war, uh, and afraid that they were going to use that on the other. Okay. The cities of Nagasaki and Hiroshima were basically wiped out, and both sides are now fearing that that's going to happen to them. They start calling this what's called an arms race. Okay. Basically, you got to look at both sides, the America or the United States and the Soviet Union, want to have the most uh, military power. And so what they do is they start building up their stockpiles of weapons. Now, here's the thing. This buildup of weapons, like I said, is called an arms race. Well, here's the kicker, though. Because the Soviet Union is in control of its economy, they control their businesses, they control what they produce. So, in order to keep up with the United States, the Soviet Union turned all of its forces to making weapons for the military. Well, they started leaving out what their people needed. So over time, are their people going to have their needs met if all the country is doing is providing or producing military weapons? Probably not. So the economy in these areas start to really falter, and the people, the civilians, are the ones that really start to suffer from this. The United States, on the other hand, is able to build up these stockpiles of weapons, but because they allow their citizens to control their own businesses, the civilians' needs are getting met. This right here are some pictures of some nuclear missiles that were set up during the Cold War. The other big thing was the space race. The United States and the Soviet Union also wanted to have the most advanced science and technology in their countries. Basically, they both wanted to go to the moon. Okay. So we call this the space race. Now, the Soviet Union was the very first to send up um, satellites and put them into orbit. Okay, so the United States was behind on that, but uh, in the '60s, the United States, become the first to send a man to the moon. Okay, so while all of this is going on, and both sides are thinking the other side's trying to rule the world, um, neither side is trying to give up. And a lot of people in both countries are truly scared that another world war is going to erupt, but this time it's going to erupt with nuclear war, which is going to basically destroy the entire planet. Okay. So, how are they going to stop the spread of communism? Well, the US and the USSR, which is the Soviet Union, because they were so powerful, they were able to influence lots of different things that were going on throughout the world. Okay. Basically, you have countries that, if you'll think back in World War One, they start making alliances with other countries. So basically, hey, if somebody goes to war against me, you got my back, right? So all of these alliances are being formed. Um, Basically, guys, you see right here, you've got the bombs on one side, you've got the bombs on the other side, and it says on no account to be used because the enemy might retaliate. And then this right here says on no account to be used because the enemy might retaliate. So basically, it's like, look, we're stockpiling these weapons, but we're not going to use them because we're scared that they're going to come back and do to us what we did to them. Okay. So are these arrows representing actual fighting? No, it's representing what's going on between the countries as far as they don't trust each other. Okay, it's like little darts. In 1949, the Western European countries, along with Canada and the United States, come up with NATO. It's called the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Um, Basically, they said that if the uh, the Soviet Union, if we tell them, look, if you attack us, we're going to unleash nuclear war on you, they think that they felt like they would keep the Soviet Union from attacking if they knew that they had these nuclear weapons that would be sent their way. This right here, the countries that were involved in NATO, you can see United States, especially France, the United Kingdom, Italy, even. These are some big players. Okay. All of the blue are the members of NATO. So, do we have a pretty good defense against the communism in Eastern Europe? Yes. But it's really a tense time period. Basically, guys, Germany ends up being divided into four sections. The Allies said, look, we're going to divide it into four sections. That way, there's no way it can regain all that power. So the United States, the Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union all control a section. Well, by 1948, the Allies in the Western side say, look, let's go ahead and reunite Germany. Let's make them democratic and they'll be good to go. Well, the Soviet Union wasn't hearing that. They didn't want to let go of control. So what they did is they divided it. You have East Germany would go under the control of the Soviet Union and the communistic government, and West Germany becomes democratic. All right. So here you have how Germany was split. All of this right here is democratic. All of this is communist. But when you look at Berlin, they still had a section of Berlin who's democratic, but is right in the middle of communist Germany. But this area right here is democratic, and they want to remain that. So what do they do? What are these allies going to do to try to keep this area of Berlin from falling to the communists? Well, because it was so deep in the Soviet-controlled territory, they decided that they were going to use these right here are just some more pictures of how it was sectioned off, how it was done. Well, in 1948, after this is done, the Soviets start blockading all land and water traffic into Western Berlin. They're trying to make it to where the Great Britain, France, and America will leave the city. So remember, guys, Berlin, the democratic part of Berlin, is in the middle of East Germany that is occupied by the Soviet Union. So the United States and Great Britain say, well, we're going to show you that we're going to support these people in Berlin. So we're going to start using an airlift. Well, what's an airlift? Ultimately, guys, they took planes and they dropped goods and supplies into these areas. So the Democratic side of Berlin would have what they needed. They had food, they had fuel, they had raw materials. And it was basically to keep these people up and out of the arms of communism. Now, this only lasted 11 months, okay? But what this showed is that a lot of people in Germany did not support the communist government, okay? So you can see here are the planes coming in and coming out in Berlin, okay? These were lifesavers for a lot of people. Okay, there's kids, and they understood the importance of these airlifts. So after that 11 months is over with, now what? Well, basically, Germany officially will become two countries with two governments. West Germany, its capital is going to be the city of Bonn, and East Germany will have East Berlin. All of West Berlin is still a democratic stronghold, but it's surrounded completely by communism. So you're going to have a couple of things that start breaking out that are actual wars when it comes to communism. Korea, the Korean War, we actually went in and helped part of Korea get rid of their communist government. Okay, so uh, in South Korea, the United States comes in and are able to set up some democratic systems. Okay, um, basically, guys, South Korea was, they were trying to be targeted by North Korea and its communism. Okay, we went in and we were actually able to stop the invasion in South Korea, so it remained a democratic stronghold. Okay. Basically, guys, there were a lot of heavy losses in the Korean War for the United States and Great Britain, but ultimately, um, we ended up prevailing. And it only came after one of our generals, MacArthur, actually disobeyed orders and stayed in South Korea and changed the war. Okay. So ultimately, you have a full country. This is Korea, and here is your borderline. South Korea is democratic. North Korea is communist. Okay. Basically, guys, in 1953, the fighting ended. No one was really victorious, but it was enough of a win to keep, like I said, South Korea from going into communist strongholds. Okay, this is the Korean War right here. These are some of the pictures. Basically, guys, a lot of people were lost. Still two separate countries today. They have talked about reunification, which means to bring the two sides together, but that has been a very, very slow process. Okay. So now you have in the United States Joseph McCarthy. He was a United States senator, and he basically started what they called a witch hunt. Basically, they went through the United States and said, if you are uh, found that you have communistic ideas and things like that, you will be dealt with. He really scared more people than needed to be. He went on TV and trying to scare people into staying far, far away of communism. And it started what they called a witch hunt. And, people were turning their neighbors in for being communist and things like that. It was a really rough time in the United States just because everybody was scared of communism. Okay. Khrushchev was from the Soviet Union, born in Ukraine. He became a member of the Communist Party. But basically, he's the man who initiated or started the very first space program in the USSR. Well, he also came up with this idea of placing nuclear missiles in Cuba. Now, if you don't realize, Cuba is only, I think, 90 miles outside of Florida. So it is very close to the United States, and this really starts worrying the United States. Ultimately, Khrushchev wanted to take over the United States and make it communist. Ultimately, he was overthrown in 1964, but at that point, he actually ends up planting Cuban missiles uh, in or missiles in Cuba, which starts what we call um, the Cold War. Not the Cold War, the Cuban Missile Crisis, which is what we're going to talk about now. So ultimately, in 1962, these ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads are sent to Cuba because they are so close to the United States. These missiles, if they had been launched, could have easily destroyed all of the southeastern states in the United States. Florida, Alabama, Georgia, North and South Carolina, Mississippi. Okay. That could have dealt a huge blow to us. All right. Right here, you see who would have immediately been taken out. And this is the next range that ultimately they were aiming for. Okay. So these missiles could have destroyed a lot of the United States as well as Canada. So basically, during this time period in the 60s, President John F. Kennedy ultimately said, you know what, we're not messing around. We are going to blockade Cuba. We are no longer going to allow Soviet ships to deliver weapons to the island of Cuba. Okay. He also sent a pretty large presence of troops to Florida, and just in case we needed to invade Cuba and keep us from being attacked. He also said that if any attack on the U.S. from Cuba would be considered an act of war by the Soviet Union, which would lead us yet again into another world war. Okay. Here's just this is showing us taking care of business as far as not letting these ships into Cuba. Okay. What he does is in 1962, Kennedy signs what's called the Proclamation for Interdiction of the Delivery of Offensive Weapons to Cuba. And this is the official blockade where we will not let anything into Cuba. Basically, guys, after about 13 days of this, and there's a lot of secret negotiations between the Soviets and Cuba, ultimately, the Soviets decided, all right, we're going to take the missiles out of Cuba, and we're not going to deal with this anymore. Basically, they said, look, we won't ever invade Cuba as long as Cuba pulls its missiles out of Italy and Turkey. Basically, guys, this 13 tense days is what kept us from a worldwide nuclear war. Okay. Cuba's dictator at the time was Fidel Castro, which we will talk more about in our next unit. He wasn't present during this, so he didn't have any say so in what was going on. Okay. You also, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, have the Vietnam War breaking out. Okay. Again, we're trying to help fight this rise of communism in countries in Europe and Asia. So basically, in Asia, Vietnam was divided, North Vietnam versus South Vietnam. The North Vietnam government was communist, and they were trying to take over Southern Vietnam, which was not. They were democratic. All right, so here you have North Vietnam, which is communist, South Vietnam, which is not. Okay. Basically, guys, Ho Chi Minh, which was the leader of North Vietnam, says if we have to fight, we shall. You will kill 10 of our men and we'll kill one of yours. And in the end, it will be you who will tire of it. Basically, he's saying, look, you can kill all of our men, but we're going to kill yours too. And you're going to eventually get tired of your men dying. Ultimately, guys, we send our troops into South Vietnam to help stop the spread of communism. But a lot of people in the United States didn't support this war. They believed that but the people who did said, look, if we can stop this fall of South Korea or South Vietnam to the communists, we can, stop this communist control. But if we can't, there's going to be country after country after country to fall to communism, which is called the domino theory. So they were like, this is why we're fighting. We're trying to stop this spread. Basically, guys, when this war starts, there's a lot of craziness going on. The Viet Cong, which is the communist government or military of North Vietnam, start using warfare tactics that are very untraditional, non-traditional. They are fighting in conditions that are really bad. They're in the jungles. There are thousands of soldiers that are getting wounded or killed, and a lot of people in the United States are really not liking this. They start to protest and say, look, we need to get our troops out. Our boys are dying for something that, it's inevitable. It's going to happen. So, and finally in 1973, President Nixon withdraws our troops. Okay. Protesters, these were college students protesting. It was a really rough time, guys. Basically, guys, the Vietnam War ended what was called a ceasefire, or ended in a ceasefire. We were like, we're not doing anything else. We're not fighting. And because South Vietnam did not have our support, it eventually fell to communism. We are on friendly terms with the country today, but that took a long time. Okay, this is in Saigon. This was the last. Basically, they sent out a call and said, "Look, we're pulling out at a specific day at a specific time. If you're not here, you're left." And that's what we did. Ultimately, guys, people in Germany are still, after the Vietnam War, they're still having to live under some very, very harsh conditions. Okay. Um, Ultimately, guys, they build a wall between East Berlin and West Berlin. It's called the Berlin Wall. And all the Eastern people in East Berlin had to do was climb this wall. But there were a lot of times where they were killed if they wanted to do that. Okay. So they actually started guarding this wall. And if people tried to cross it, they were shot and killed. Okay. 103-mile long wall between East and West Berlin. And it was heavily guarded. And it was basically a very big symbol of, we're not dealing with any invaders trying to come in here and taking away our communist government. Okay, here's you can see the construction of the wall. This is West Berlin. This is East Berlin. You can tell between the two which one is successful just in this picture. Okay. Um, it is it's a big deal. You see the barbed wire at the top, and there are a lot of times where people really tried to help people to escape to West Berlin. Okay. You are entering the American sector carrying weapons off duty, forbidden, obey traffic laws. Basically, they're saying, look, if you come into this area, if you're allowed into this area, these are the rules you have to follow. This right here is where Khrushchev and JFK were trying to negotiate the treaties before the Cuban Missile Crisis took place. Here are pictures. This is in the late 80s, guys. This is in, I think, 1987. And you can see this side over here is communist. This is not, okay? They want to help these people, but they're not allowed to. Basically, guys, because the Soviet Union controlled their economy and basically used it to make military weapons and not meet the needs of their people, their people were very quickly losing patience with this government. They were, because they had very little food, they are really losing control. They can't protect their people as far as from their food shortages and not having money and things like that. So there is a rising cry for let's help Eastern Berlin. By the 80s, a lot of Soviet people have lost faith in the communist government because they're not taking care of them like they had originally promised. And you have people starting to demand freedom from this communist rule. Because they were spending more money having to put down these these revolts and still trying to keep up with the U.S., the economy was so unstable that ultimately Gorbachev, who took control of the USSR, started reducing government control of businesses and started to increase freedoms for all of its citizens, which was a big deal. This also led to a lot of that's Mikhail Gorbachev. Ultimately, this leads to a lot of talk with the United States. In 1987, in 1987, our president, Ronald Reagan, actually gave a speech at the wall and said, Mr. Gorbachev, bring down this wall. He called for the reunification or the bringing back together of East and West Berlin. Okay. And in 1987, it started being destroyed. Okay. By 1989, the Berlin Wall was completely destroyed. Okay. This was a big deal because now this is one united country again. it was an awesome scene if you can see some of the old video clips from it and things. Okay. These people wanted freedom, they were craving freedom. So finally, after about 30 years, Germany is finally reunited. In 1990, the German citizens voted to make the countries of East Germany and West Germany one country again. And today, because of this, Germany has a free democracy, which we talked about earlier in the year. Their people help to elect their legislative members, and they also have a mixed market economy, which there are things the government controls like taxes and things like that, but the people have ultimate say so in what kind of businesses they create and what they are allowed to make. All right. Finally, guys, once everything is reunited, the Soviet Union begins to seek their independence as well. And between 1989 and 1991, the Soviet Union collapses. The Cold War is finally over, and the countries that came together to form the Soviet Union began to become their own independent countries again. Russia becomes Russia again, and again is the largest country in Europe. Okay. All right, guys, that is it. It's a pretty neat time period because a lot of the end stuff, I remember from when I was little. So, anyway, we will talk about this as a whole later.